G'day guys, welcome back to a new episode of the Boundary Riders podcast, episode 67. A few things to talk about today. We have the injuries, of course, we'll have an update on the Christian Petrarca situation. Also want to take a look at a deeper dive at the West Coast Eagles and where they're at the moment. Some interesting news regarding maybe a three-way grand final series, if that would ever be a situation in the AFL. Of course, our fan favourite segments in the Flog of the Week, doing our tips and the fantasy breakdown as well. So let's roll the intro, guys, and get straight into it. And then Rankin from the pocket, don't tell me, Isaac Rankin!
Yeah.
He's just got the license for a brothel.
Well, I think Gather Round's going to be AFL this next season.
It's at the handle at the back, Nick Dacos to get the pies home! He's done it! So guys, as always, let's start with a couple of news-breaking parts of the episode, and we'll start with a couple of injury concerns. One was Alex Keith for Western Bulldogs. He's going to be sidelined for the next 6 weeks. That's really unfortunate, as he did a hamstring strain in the loss against the Brisbane Lions. But it does seem for Western Bulldogs fans that Ed Richards has been cleared of his concussion protocols and should be ready to go for Saturday's game against the Dockers. But of course, let's talk about Christian Petrarca. So, early reports were that Petrarca was suffering a serious injury to his ribs. It seemed that he suffered 4 broken ribs and a lacerated spleen, along with a small puncture to his lung, and underwent surgery on Monday evening and was remaining in hospital at that time. Now, there have been reports around potentially he'll be out for 6 weeks. But there's also reports from Tom Morris, which, take with a grain of salt, but he could potentially miss the rest of the season. Now, at the moment, the Demons are sitting in 10th spot, so I would say if they're up in a finals race and if he's okay to go, then they'll probably risk it and try and give him the last month of the season or something. But sitting as it is right now, it's round 14 coming up now, at least 6 weeks at the minimum. We'd get into, round 20. So, let's say it is a minimum. If there's 4 weeks to go and there's no chance of them making finals, or very minimal chance of making finals, I wouldn't be surprised if they just say, let's just end it. But, yeah, if there's 4 or 5 weeks to go, he seems like he's okay to go, then I think they'll probably risk it. But that's really terrible news for Melbourne and, Christian Petrarca. That's really devastating news because he's been by far their best player this year. Or their best midfielder. I mean, you'd probably say the likes of Stephen May and Max Gawn have been their better players, but he's definitely been top 3. I don't think that's a question mark or whatever. It's basically a lot of the injury news stuff. People may realise as well this is coming out a little bit later, being a Thursday. I'm recording this on Wednesday night, so give me a little bit of love. It's 8 o'clock here, so this will be coming out Thursday morning. Give me a lot of love, guys. Usually we record these on Monday afternoon, but because of the footy this week, and I've had a lot of things going on, just got a new dog as well, so that's just a lot of things going on at the moment, and we should be getting back into the groove of things next week. If my brother... Also, because the games are on Friday night, we're probably pushing everything back a day. For example, we may keep the same days for the video essays that we're trying to drop every fortnight, but with the podcast and the tips coming out, we may push them back a day, especially if I can get my brother to come around and do the podcast. That would probably be a good idea as well. So, I'm a little bit unsure how long this episode's going to go for, just because, I'm trying to get this out a little bit quicker, and it's bloody late. Give me a break. And there's not a lot of news topics to talk about this week because, injuries and suspensions and stuff, because that's all gone now. So, I mean, it's almost time for the teams to come out. So, we may just wait and see how that goes. But the one thing I did want to talk about today is the West Coast Eagles, because I think they're in a very interesting spot right now. So, of course, Harley Reid has been a massive factor in the resurgence of the West Coast Eagles. I don't think that's a denying factor. I kind of wasn't on board with it at the start of the season, and probably even after their first win, but after seeing them play over about a month period when Harley Reid really hit his form, I started to believe the real factor that he is bringing to the club. And I think it was shown massively in the North Melbourne loss, the fact that they, for 3 quarters, even the 3 and a bit quarters, looked pretty crap, let's be honest. They did have 2 goals, 15 on the scoreboard, so you can make a point of they had the scoring shots, they just couldn't convert. But around the ground, they were getting smashed in the midfield. They were getting smashed around the ground. The tackle pressure wasn't there. And it's kind of brought up a question of if West Coast are where they're kind of at right now. So currently, obviously, they sit in 16th spot. And the next 5 games, so they have the bye this week. After that, they got the Bombers, Hawthorn, Melbourne, Brisbane, and St Kilda. Now they got Hawthorn and Brisbane at home. Hawthorn, interesting game. Hawthorn are in really good form. We'll see how they go after, because I think Hawthorn have the last bye. So we'll have to see how they go after their bye, Hawthorn, if they come off sluggish or whatever. But they play Melbourne away. You would expect them to probably lose that, as well as Essendon away. Then Brisbane and Brisbane at home, which is a very interesting one because it's in Perth. Don't really travel the best, Brisbane, especially to Perth. I know they've been beat by Fremantle a few times over the past few years. And then they've got St Kilda after that. Now, obviously, finals aren't an option here. They're not really a factor. So, where can West Coast kind of finish up? Now, they've got the Crows in front of them in 15th and St Kilda in front of them as well. So, potentially that game in 6 weeks against St Kilda could be a game that defies where they finish on the ladder. I don't see the Crows finishing in 15th spot. I feel like they'll just rebound after in the second half of the season, potentially finish around that, let's say 13th to 10, I would say, where the Crows are going to finish. St Kilda, on the other hand, could be very well down in the bottom 4. So that's something that I can kind of see happening. So maybe West Coast, best case scenario, they finishes around 15th, 14th, which means they probably will have, I don't really know draft picks and that, but you would say at that point they'd be getting at least pick 4. I think looking at the West Coast list right now, there's a lot of top-end veteran players, and then there's a lot of younger players, but there's nothing in between. There's no depth players at all at the West Coast Eagles. Like, just looking at it, looking at their waffle team last week, their best players were True, Dower, Rotham, Livingston. Brockman was okay in the game, and that's basically about it. There weren't a lot of other really good contributors last week. Now, granted, of course, I'm not looking at a huge sample size here, but the one thing that West Coast have had this year that they haven't had for, 2 years now is a healthy injury list. Oh, sorry, not having a big injury list. Like on the injury list right now, West Coast have Oscar Allen, who's 1 week away, Bazzo, who's 2 to 4 weeks away, Liam Duggan, who'll be back next week, Elijah Hewitt, which is 4 to 6 weeks, but I'm kind of thinking he'll be out for the rest of the year, Jaden Hunt, who's back next week, and then Noah Long, who's the only one now who's ruled out for the rest of the season. So, out of those on the list, Oscar Allen, obviously he comes back, obviously. Elijah Hewitt, yeah, you'd say he makes their best 22, so does Jaden Hunt, and so does Liam Duggan. Rhett Bazzo, he's kind of on the cusp. Noah Long obviously can't make it for the rest of the year, but he would be in their best team. So looking at it right now, there's a couple of players there that you would say are in their best team. So if you look at it, Oscar Allen would take over Jack Darling, and you would think at the end of the year he would retire. That's pretty fair to say. Then Duggan, obviously in the team, but Hewitt, you'd probably say he's in the team, but you'd say he's kind of a bench player right now. And Jaden Hunt probably takes that half-back role. So there's really only 2 or 3 players there that are jumping into your best team right now. So West Coast are very lucky at this point that they are in a point where they have a pretty healthy list, which they haven't had for a while now. So looking at their depth, they don't have a lot. And I think it's pretty fair to say. True, Dower, Rotham. Like Rotham's been in and out of the team. True played his first game a couple of weeks ago. Is it Dower or Doer? Whatever it is. He's played a couple of games this year. But other than that, there's not a lot there to really bounce off of. So I truly think that West Coast have to look at the draft for the next year or two. I know there's been a lot of talk about Elliot Yeo potentially leaving. If a team is willing to give up a lot, I honestly wouldn't be that opposed to it if I'm the West Coast Eagles, because the one thing that I would be opposed to, though, is if Harley Reid is a big saying of, we want you at the club. If Harley Reid thinks he can do it with Tim Kelly there, helping him around, then maybe you try to keep him there for an extra couple of years. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't be handcuffing Elliot Yeo to stay at the club, because right now, West Coast aren't in a position to be making finals. I think that's a pretty fair statement to say. So I think that they really need to go heavy on the draft the next year or two, the West Coast Eagles, and the next 2 or 3, and try and build through that depth, and maybe even look at some recyclable players around the league that, potentially from WA or potentially just aren't getting a game at their club, and then building through that structure. Because right now, West Coast have got a very good spine. I would say that. They've got, Allen, Waterman for their forwards, Barras, McGovern for their backs, and then, you got your midfield pretty comfortable there, and then their ruckman and Matt Flynn. Didn't have a very good game last week, but you would say he's a definite mainstay for their ruck. But their outer side and their runners, there's not a huge amount of them. Like, can you really trust Witherden as a halfbacker? You don't really know. Liam Duggan is good, but I think he can potentially run through the midfield. But there's a lot of players that, they're depth players. There's not a lot of them. So right now they're basically playing on the brink of, if they had 3 or 4 injuries in a couple of weeks, they would struggle to fill a good team. And, as we saw, obviously Harley Reid is a lot better than the majority of the depth players that you would expect for any club, really. So when Harley Reid was gone, there was a huge gap left in that team, even just as an energizer, really. If you just put it as that lower point. So right now, I think that the Harley Reid factor is massive, but I do think they have to find other ways to be energized to play a game of football, other than him pushing off three opponents kicking a goal. They've got to find more hype around a game rather than just him doing that. So they have to find something more, but they do need to rebuild they do need to build their depth, because I think this year Harley Reid has covered over a lot of cracks that we saw last year. They didn't really fill, I would say. They didn't really go to the draft per se, pushing hard for it, other than getting Harley Reid, of course. And I'm not going to sit here and sound like Sam McClure and say, they should have traded away Harley Reid for 3 first-round picks and, they'd be doing a lot better off. I don't think that's the case. I think that they got Harley Reid and they did great to get him. And I don't think he would have turned North Melbourne's fortunes around, because I think West Coast have a lot more than North Melbourne. But I do think that he was a good get for them. But I do also think, though, that when they went for, Flynn and Brockman as the other couple of trade targets that they got, I think this year they need to really focus on the draft. And they won't get the number 1 pick, because I think North Melbourne have got that pretty well sewn up now. And Richmond, I feel like they can probably win a couple of games going into the rest of the year if they get a decently healthy list on the board. So at worst case scenario, best case scenario for their draft hand, maybe they get pick 2. But I do think that if they can try and potentially trade away a couple of their top end older players, and potentially look at that sort of scenario, maybe that's a good idea, because they're not going to make finals in the next 2 years with the list that they've currently got. I think that's pretty fair to say. Unless they stay absolutely at the peak and don't get any injuries, maybe they can contend for finals. But let's be honest, you can't. Every team's going to get an injury every couple of weeks. That's just the game that we know. So there's no depth at West Coast. That's their that would be my real concern for them right now. I think they're fine pretty much everywhere else. They have one of the better spines in any team in the one of the better teams in the bottom 8 or bottom 10. So I think they're fine on that factor. But I think that is a really big concern for the West Coast Eagles. So they have to kind of build out depth, and the best way to do that is to go to the draft and potentially pick up some players that don't cost a lot and that they can build off of. So that's kind of what I'm thinking there. And the last thing I wanted to say out is Adam Simpson. What happens next with him? Because I believe he's out of contract, is it next year or this year? But there's been no real talk about him. Obviously last year there was a lot of talk about he's going to get sacked. He can't survive this year. And look, I was on the side of he probably will get sacked because of how poor they did. But they've kept him, and they've done pretty decently this year compared to last year. But there's not a lot of question marks on him talked about. And I'm not saying that there should be, but I do think that there needs to be a little bit of talk about Harley Reid's factor of them winning games. Against Melbourne, for example, they probably don't win that game without him. Let's be honest. They don't win that game. And the game they probably win this year is they win the Derby, because they played really well and it wasn't just Harley Reid who sparked them. But, they've won 3 games this year, the West Coast Eagles. So what are you expecting from them without Harley Reid at the team? Would Adam Simpson be sitting in a worse position if it wasn't for his young star pulling them over the line? So their other win was obviously against Richmond as well. which we've seen that Richmond weren't very good at that stage. And that was their first win of the year. So they've beaten Richmond, they beat Fremantle, and they beat Melbourne. Looking at it, they also got smashed against the Crows. So you're looking at both ends of this. Harley Reid probably doesn't win you the game against... Without Harley Reid, they don't win against Melbourne. The other two games, I would say they probably win. I think that's fair enough. I think they deserve those sort of wins. But at this point, does it need to be questioned that Adam Simpson really hasn't changed much else? I mean, has really much changed? They're not playing a lot differently. I don't really see a different game plan, so to speak. I think that they're just playing... They've just got more personnel out there. So, which is good, and shows that they can be a good team when they've got their personnel there. But I don't think there's a game plan, so to speak, to say that this team is, pushing in the right direction with a defensive attributes if you're looking at Fremantle, or they're not pushing forward as a real attacking team like Essendon, or or a real good stoppage team like, I don't know, Port Adelaide, or I don't know, I can just throw teams out there and say something that they're good at. But what is West Coast mantra right now? Give it to Harley Reid and hope that he can drag us over the line, and hope that our other senior players that haven't been there for the last few years drag us over the line in games. Like, that's been the last two years have really shown that Adam Simpson's really had his hands tied behind his back. This year it kind of feels like he should have free reign on what to do next. And it just feels like he's not doing a lot. Like, what does West Coast stand for? There's not a lot right now. Like, obviously, and that's what I'm saying with the Harley Reid stuff, he's glossed over a lot of cracks that the West Coast Eagles have had for the last few years, like this year. Because he's won them the game against Melbourne. He was by one of their best players. Even against Richmond, he was pretty good, and against Fremantle, he was very good as well. So without him, do they win those 3 games? I don't know if they win all 3. Let's just put it that way. So yeah, I think there needs to be a couple of... I'm not saying that Simpson should be sacked, but I do think there needs to be questions asked about what does his team stand for? Because I think at the top level, every single team has like a sort of like a point of like, what do they stand for, or what are their major attributes to win them the flag, or to get them into a standing point of top finals attributes. Sydney, their kick mark game is one of the best. Their foot skills are some of the best. Carlton, their stoppage play is one of the best in the competition. Essendon, the way they win from the middle of the ground and rebound is one of their better attributes at the moment. I could name it all day, but those are those sort of things that are building for those clubs. And I just feel like the West Coast at the moment, there's not really a mantra that they have. Like, they have stopped a lot more of their like possession game that just killed them over the past couple of years as the evolution of the games come on. But I still don't think there's a real game plan to say what do they stand for as a football club. That's basically where I'm sitting at. Now, I could ramble about this all day. I'll kind of move on from that, but that's kind of my thoughts right now. I think West Coast are in a decent spot right now. I think they've got enough veteran players up there that they can build from that, but I do think that their depth is very questionable, and I do think this year and a couple of years going forward, they need to look at the draft, especially before the Tasmanian team comes in as well. But let's move on. So, a little bit of talk over the week, well, actually just before the last podcast that we did, I did, about the potential of a best of 3 grand final series. Now, this is talked about on Footy Classified with John Longmire, the Sydney Swans coach, about what would be an idea as to even out the competition or whatever, because obviously the grand finals play at the MCG every year, and other than the COVID years. And look, I'm from South Australia, and I agree that the grand final should be played at the MCG. I think that it should be because it's the biggest ground in the country. I think that's just fair enough, and it gets the most, the best atmosphere for a grand final. I would just say that. But I do think now, especially, like, for people who say, like, oh, it's not traditional to play it somewhere else, or, you can't make these sort of changes because of tradition. All right. Tradition, honestly, throw it out the window at this point, because the game has changed from the 70s, 80s, 90s, even the early 2000s. So tradition can just go out the window. It's not an issue. We've got to open our mind and think about things, especially if we want to equalise the competition. So I honestly wouldn't be massively opposed to look, I wouldn't be happy with the 3 grand final system because I don't think that, especially if it did get to would it be a dead rubber, the last game? I don't think it would be. I think they would do it similar to like the NBA as like a final series. Like if the last game gets to, if someone wins it like 2-0, then it's over. I think that's how it would be done. But how would that go? So I would assume that it would be home game at your club, let's say it's Sydney, home game at Adelaide, Collingwood. So I'm assuming. See, the thing is, most grand finals are last. When was the last time 2 interstate clubs played in a grand final? Would it be 2007? Is it that long ago? I can't even... No, 2006. Because 2007, Geelong played in a grand final. So, yeah, I think that's probably the last time. So let's say that was the case, which I think it'd be fine to play at the MCG. So where would the other 2 games be played? Would you play them 1 at the interstate club and then 2 at the MCG? Was that fair? For the MCG, for the Melbourne-based club? I don't know. But I do think we have to think outside of the box when it comes to the equalisation of the game. I don't necessarily like the idea of a 3-game grand final, to be honest. But I do think we need to start thinking about how we make it more equal. I do like how the AFL is kind of looking for the fixture next year as some Melbourne clubs, instead of having their game at Marvel Stadium, I think for Collingwood, for example, they're playing their game at the Gold Coast. I think that's a great idea to give them a home game somewhere else. I hope that's the case going forward, that the Melbourne Victorian-based clubs have less games at the MCG or at Marvel Stadium because... Like, for example, the Bulldogs, they are playing 5 games in a row at Marvel Stadium. And that's either side of the bye. So that's 6 weeks that they don't leave Victoria. That's not fair. But, on the other hand, looking at it, they have played a full part of the season so far without having a bye until round 15. Meanwhile, the Sydney Swans have had a bye in round 7 and in round 12. How is that fair? It's not. So, and then you look at the Giants as well. They had a bye early on. I think it was round 3, and they had a bye in round 12 before the likes of the Bulldogs have even had a bye. So, the way that they did it this season isn't exactly fair either. So, I don't know how they equalise it. I'm not here to tell you how it is, but I'm saying that it's not equal right now. And if someone thinks it is, you're a fucking moron, let's be honest. I don't think anyone can sit there looking at the competition right now and think that the way they set it up is fair. Like... Even if we like, let's say, like a scenario of we cut back the season to, at the moment, 18 games. So everyone plays each other once and then you play your rival twice. Or you cut it right back to 17 games and everyone just plays each other once. It still wouldn't be exactly fair because even then you would have to, like, the games of like Collingwood and that, they'd be playing a lot of games at the MCG and then... They get more exposure to the MCG, which at the end of the day, that's another talking point as well. Because Victorian clubs play at the MCG or whatever every 2 or 3 weeks at the least, and then clubs like the Swans, the Power, the Crows, the Giants, the Lions, whatever, they play at the MCG maybe 2 or 3 times a year, and that's if they were the top team last year, so they get more exposure to the MCG. So that's another factor as well. So I don't ever think it could ever be perfect. I don't think that's something that we could ever see. But right now, I feel like this year when they tried to shape it as... Sorry, my dog keeps on barking in the background. It's my new dog, and he's a crier. He's a sook. Anyway, I don't think it'd ever be truly fair. I think that's fair to say. But right now, I don't think that this year has been fair at all on the fixture front. I don't think they've made it fair to whatsoever. And yeah, I think that they've gone a step backwards. I don't think they've never nailed it. But this year just seems at the point of it's not fair at all. Yeah, I just think it's kind of crap. Alright guys, let's get to our fan favourite segment, of course, which is the Flog of the Week. We are back for another week, guys. Congratulations, all of you, for returning to us. I don't know why I said congratulations, but anyway. Of course, if you don't know, the Flog of the Week basically goes to a media personality or a footballer, but most of the time it's either a journalist or someone in the media, because they don't get called out enough, and me and my brother thought... There's no award that gives it to them, so fuck them. They deserve it. I mean, look, if they're going to win something and be absolute flogs, this is what they're going to win. So at the end of the year, me and my brother, I'm keeping tabs of every single week's nominee, and at the end of the year with our live stream when we do the Boundary Riders votes countdown. We'll be doing like a similar to how they do in the Brownlow, how like every few rounds they'll give away an annoying award or something. So we'll be doing that, but we'll be doing goal of the year, mark of the year. I'm already thinking like we'll do goal of the year, something that we have watched on a live stream, mark of the year that we should watch during a live stream. We'll also do the flog of the week, and maybe we'll come up with a couple of other things as well. We may just do things like give away like a gift card or whatever. But basically, flog of the week this week is someone who has been in the media. He's a legend of the game, and he's one of the best coaches that we've ever seen. But that doesn't mean you get away with saying something stupid and something that's just ridiculous. So this week, the flog of the week has gone to Leigh Matthews. Now, sorry to anyone who's a massive Leigh Matthews fan, but you don't get away with acting like an absolute wanker. And I think this is real, like, his brain is starting to rot on the fact of, like, being part of the media. Because the way he acts here in this... So if you don't know, he's on a show on Channel 9 I think it's called Footy Furnace. I don't know. I don't really watch it. I don't even watch any show on Channel 9. I just watch the highlights of Footy Classified and just laugh at how stupid they sound. But anyway, he has gone on, he's on the Footy Furnace. By the way, doesn't even go into the studio. He just sits in his office and does it like via Zoom or whatever. So it's like he doesn't even give a fuck. He just gets paid to do it. But... he was answering questions about who he thinks the best 3 players of the modern era have been. And he said that, I think, Buddy Franklin was number 1, Gary Ablett Jr. was number 2, and then Paddy Dangerfield was number 3. Now, I don't have an issue with any of those 3. I think it's fair enough to say them. I don't necessarily agree with what he said, but he can have that opinion. So, because of this, because it's Dustin Martin's 300th game coming up this weekend, this is why people were so shocked by it. But... what he said was, after it, was the 3 Norm Smith medals is enormous achievement, but it's only 3 games in his 300. Now look, Leigh, I understand that you're a massive legend of the game, but for you to sit there and act like that Dustin Martin has played 3 good games in his career is like, get over yourself. Like, what do you mean? Did you not see him play between the years of 2017 to 2021, 22? Even towards the end of 22, he was pretty decent as well. I mean, he almost made All-Australian last year as well, by the way. But let's just say 2017 to 2020, because that's when everyone remembers the Richmond era. He was by far the best player in the competition. And if you don't think that, I don't know what you were watching, but obviously he was. I think that's a pretty fair statement to say. So I don't understand the disrespect against Dustin Martin over the past... I get, like, over the past 6 or... over the last... year, or like over the last 6 weeks or whatever, he hasn't been the best, but you don't disrespect the guy for his whole career because of his last 6 weeks. And I feel like it's a lot to do with the fact that he doesn't, like, he's basically extracted himself from talking to the media, which I fully agree with. I think that he has a stance of, whatever I say, the media is going to take it one way or another. So I agree with him that he should stay away from the media, Dustin Martin. But I feel like that's a lot of his, like, animosity from the media itself, like, taking cracks at him because he won't come out and defend himself on the media, because there's no point in doing it. If he comes out and defends himself, he's going to get raked through the coals for it. If he doesn't, then they're just going to say, oh, he doesn't talk to the media anymore, he's not talking to us. It's like, bro, who the hell would want to talk to you anyway? You sit there and bag out all these players every single week, and then you wonder why they don't want to talk to you? Are you fucking brain dead, bro? Like... I'm actually thinking of doing a video very shortly about the journalism in AFL journalism, because I think it's an absolute joke. But I think it's something that's very interesting to talk about because no one really calls them out for it. Like, I do appreciate the likes of, I'm sure you guys have seen them on Instagram or Twitter, but AFL Central, who, you know, bring up very regularly when AFL media personalities, like, absolutely, or journalists or whatever, bring up absolute crap. And he's more than happy to just show it. Because he was the one who got me to originally see this talking point about Dustin Martin and Leigh Matthews. And look, I like Leigh as a person. I think he's a great coach, and I think he was a great player when he played. I didn't really see a lot of it, but I do understand he had a very big aura around him when he played. And he was obviously a massively successful coach. He got, like, you know, he got them in the four premierships for Brisbane. Was it 4 or 3? It was 3. I don't know. My brain's fried. It's 8:40 at night, okay? I'm sorry that I can't remember. But massively successful coach, obviously. But I feel like his brain is getting rotted by being part of the media now. Because the statement of saying that he won 3 Norm Smith medals is an enormous achievement, but it's only 3 games in his 300, is basically pointing out like, oh, you've only played 3 good games in your career. It's like, what are you talking about? He was the best player for like the most influential player of that era for Richmond. Even in the year when they didn't win the grand final, it was arguably their best year. So to sit there and act like that's not good enough is crap. No way does that makes no sense. So for Leigh to say, I just thought it was pretty crap, and I feel like that statement is basically showing the brain rot of the media personalities now that they have to try and grab a clickbaity title or a clickbaity headline to put on their articles or statements to get their shows, their articles on their newspapers get read now, because I feel like no one's reading or watching traditional AFL media anymore, are they? I mean, the fact that I get views on this channel for AFL shows that no one gives a fuck about it anymore, except for, for anyone above the age of 45 who, can't be bothered watching YouTube, don't understand how to navigate it very well. And that's not everyone above the age of 45, by the way. But that's just, everyone knows the type. You know the type of person who doesn't know how to. Like, I know my mum would not know how to do it. So, yeah, anyway, that statement from Leigh Matthews is completely ludicrous. And look, there wasn't a lot of people this week, but I felt like that sparked in my brain saying, yeah, that's a bit of a Flog nomination. So I'm sure this will get back to the hierarchy of Channel 9. Leigh Matthews will hear it, and he'll just pull back a bit, guys. So that's really what this segment's all about. It's all about just getting the top people out there just to pull back a little bit and just realise that they've just made a mistake every once in a while. Anyway, I'm sure I know every single person that gets nominated is on notice. They always send me a message asking, look, can you take it down? I understand that I've made a mistake. Or some people say, I understand that I've made a mistake and I'll work on it. So I do appreciate that. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to take away your nomination. If you have deserved it, you take it. And I know my brother stands at the same point of me. He stands beside me as well, agreeing with me. Now, I'm obviously just having a go. Having just a laugh. But anyway, that's basically our Flog of the Week this week, guys. So, guys, let's get into our tips for round 14. Of course, we have a lot of buys this week, which include Carlton, Essendon, Geelong, Melbourne, West Coast, and the Gold Coast Suns. So, there is only 6 games this weekend, but let's break down our tips for this week. My tips are Brisbane to beat St Kilda on Friday night. On Saturday, I've picked Fremantle to beat the Bulldogs, Hawthorn to beat the Tigers, the Swans to beat the Crows, Collingwood to beat North Melbourne on Sunday, and then the Giants to beat Port Adelaide on Sunday as well. Now, my brother has actually sent through his tips as well. So he has gone Brisbane to beat St Kilda, Fremantle to beat the Bulldogs, Hawthorn to beat Richmond, Adelaide to beat the Swans, Collingwood to beat North Melbourne, and then Port Adelaide to beat the Giants. So we've got a couple of differences this week. My brother has given his explanations as to why he has picked different teams this week as well. So, first of all, we will start with the Fremantle game up against the Bulldogs. Now, my brother originally tipped the Bulldogs, but he did tell me why he has changed his tip to Fremantle. So he's gone, like last week, Norton and Darcy are both out and have to rely on Bontempelli and Jamari Eagle-Hagan to kick their goals, and Fremantle's defence should hold up. Now, I'd say the same thing as well, but I think the inconsistencies of the Western Bulldogs is still to be questioned. I think their midfield is very on and off. I'm unsure as to why they're not playing Bontempelli as much as they should be in the middle of the ground. I know they keep on chucking him forward to try and make him a forward option, but I don't think they get it in there enough without him. Now, Ed Richards should be back this week for the Bulldogs, so that would be a good inclusion for them. But right now, I think Fremantle coming off the bye. I think teams are starting to do better coming off byes. We've seen the likes of Sydney winning last week, North Melbourne winning their first game, and Brisbane after their byes. So maybe teams are doing better off the byes, and I think Fremantle, fresh off the bye, will be a lot better off for it. And I think Fremantle, both teams, I think the Bulldogs are more potent when their best team's in, but without the likes of Norton and Darcy, I think they are going to struggle. The only reason why I think some people would be picking the Bulldogs is because it's at Marvel. If it was at the MCG, which I don't really think it would be, but if it was, I would give the Bulldogs a lot more of a chance here. But at Marvel Stadium, Fremantle, I think they'll be pretty decent enough here coming off the bye. Their defence will hold up pretty comfortably, and yeah, similar to how my brother thinks, I think Fremantle will win that one. Now, the Swans versus the Crows. Very interesting one. Obviously, it's a pretty big game from last year when Ben Keys kicked that goal that was called a point, and that inevitably made them lose that game as well as missing the finals. But my brother has gone the Crows because they're going to be dragged through the mud this week, which they inevitably have, and they should respond in front of their home crowd. No Walker last week, so he should be back this week. My brother has made a caveat to this tip, though, that if Taylor Walker is out of the side, that he will be picking the Swans. But I thought Sydney would have fallen off last week. And I'm not saying they can't lose against the Crows, because I think that this will be actually quite a close game. I don't think the Crows are going to play 3 straight bad games in a row. I think it is a bit of a danger game for Sydney, though, because I think it's something that Sydney are expected to go and win this. We are expected to beat the Crows, and pretty comfortably. I don't think that's going to be the case, because I think Adelaide will want to make a response, because the last 2 weeks they've played poorly. They have missed a couple of players, I know that, but they haven't played well. I mean, if you play well and without the injuries, that's more than fair, but they haven't played well either against Hawthorn and Richmond. And I think Rankin will be back this week as well. So with the likes of them ones back, I think the Crows do have a sneaky chance here. But I think Sydney's form right now can't be questioned. I'm tipping Sydney basically on form. That's basically where I'm sitting at right now. And yeah, I think this will be a pretty close game. I think it's very different to what a lot of people will be thinking. But so the last game that we want to talk about is Port Adelaide versus the Giants. Now, I have picked GWS, he has picked Port Adelaide. He has said that Port Adelaide, after the bye, should be fresh. The Giants can't win in the midfield battle, and Port Adelaide dominate at stoppage and clearance. Port Adelaide's defence should stack up well against the Giants' forward line. Now, that's kind of where I've got the Giants winning at. If the Giants can equalise in the middle, I think that they've been very off the last 4 or 5 weeks, I would say. I thought after the bye they would respond, but they didn't really play that well on the weekend against Hawthorn. They did for a bit, but I think Hawthorn did very well to just keep in touch for the majority of the game and then eventually run over the top of them. I know it was it was definitely a harsh free kick against Tom Green, so they could have won that game, but I think Hawthorn in that good of form were good enough to win that game. On the other hand, I think Port Adelaide, I think they're going to be a bit sluggish off the bye, if I'm being honest. That's where I'm sitting. And I think the Giants' forward line is where it's going to be won here. I think that Toby Green could have a big day here. I think they do have a couple of matchups that they could chuck on in Port Adelaide. Maybe Alir could go to him, or maybe a Ryan Burton would be an option. But I think this is where the Giants can get this game on. If they can equalise in their midfield, I think their forward line can start to kick goals and could be a big danger factor here. This one is in Sydney as well. If it was at Adelaide Oval, I'd probably have a bit of a different thought about it. But in Sydney, I'm going to be going the Giants in that one. But that's basically the tips that I wanted to break down. Other games, I think, be pretty straightforward. God, I'm going to rude to say that. I know that as soon as I said it, I was like, don't say that. But that's basically where I'm sitting all the tips, guys. So, of course, our channel has had a league this year running through. So let's take a look at our tipping comp. And after a really poor week last week, I only got 3. It was really poor. The games that I missed last week, I'll quickly go take a look. I tipped the Crows. That was a pretty tough one, obviously. I picked the Bulldogs over Brisbane. I did tip Hawthorn over Giants, so I got that one over a couple of people. I was the one who picked St Kilda. I was the one who picked Geelong over Sydney. I thought, hey, midway through the second quarter, I was onto something. But at the end of the day, Sydney came over the top and won. Essendon, yeah, they were pretty poor against Carlton. That's a big miss for me. But I did tip Collingwood, so I got that one back on some people who tipped Melbourne in that game. So I had a pretty poor week. My brother, on the other hand, looking at him quickly, he got 4, so he got back on the ledger a little bit. He's only 1 tip behind me now. But after a really poor week from me, I am sitting in 5th spot. My brother is sitting in 7th spot. I think he got up a few tips this week. And for the first time in a very long time, we have a new leader on our tipping comp. Now, he is equal with Brendan, but he has a better margin. So, Paul P. Paul's Viking 4-6 has taken the lead. So, congratulations to Paul. Now, this will be... Even if we have 2 people on the same amount of tips, it will count on margin. We're not giving away 2 winners. One winner. Okay, there's only one premier at the end of the year. You don't just have you were close, so no. No. Okay? But I am saying, good on Paul for taking... I think he jumped 1 spot on the ladder, but there are a couple of people who definitely dropped off this week. Because of the poor week to a couple of people, there's a gap now of 3 tips between 3rd and 4th. So Kirsty only got 2 last week. She's sitting in 4th spot with 74. But if she had a decent week last week, she could have jumped up the top. But Paul as well got the highest amount of tips in our league. He got 5 tips. So that's why he's pushed up into top spot. I think he jumped... I'm unsure how many tips he jumped, but he definitely wasn't top 2 or 3 last week. So he's jumped right up to the top. Congratulations, Paul. He's keeping himself in the hunt for a win in the Bounty Riders tipping comp, I guess. So when we get to the tipping next year, guys, we'll be doing another tipping comp and we'll make it open so everyone can join. And I think we only had 14 enter this year, so I'm sure we can get a bunch more of that. I think we've tripled our subscriber count, so I'm sure we can make a bigger league than that. But guys, that's basically the tips that we have for this week. So finally, let's get into our AFL Fantasy chat. So AFL Fantasy this week, I was able to win again. I have won my last 5 games. I am so on fire, guys. You have no idea. I'm in the best form in the whole league, even though I went down this week. So apparently, because I didn't win by enough, my percentage got knocked down to 7th. But when you're in this hotter form, it doesn't really matter. But this is where I'm going to hit the wall this week. I already know it. Let's just talk about last week first, though. So in round 13, I had a pretty decent week in my forward line. My forward line really carried me this week. Heaney 108, Flanders massive 163, Sexton massive 130. They obviously carried with all those disposals they're getting against St Kilda, getting absolutely flooded against. Fisher also got 115. Max Gorn got the 148. I took the vice captaincy early of Jordan Dawson with the 124 to 248. So, and Elliot Yeo and Harry Shees were pretty decent as well. But there was also a massive downturn in this team. Dacos was injured as well. I'm interested to see if he plays this week. He got 62. Riley Bonner got absolutely destroyed. He only got 37. Sam Walsh only got 79. Bontempelli scraped to get to 93. Took Miller, got tagged and only got 47. Tom Green only got 77. And Darcy Wilson, he's kind of gone off now. I feel like I have to get rid of him after the bye. He got 34. So there's a couple of players this week that really didn't hit their straps, and yeah, going into next week as well, that's where I basically get to now. So we'll get to my trades. So my trades for this week are I've got rid of Ollie Dempsey for Billy Dowling. I got rid of Jake Rogers for Toby Pink. And I got rid of Closey for Jordan Clark. So I got Clark because I feel like I need a defender now. I feel like Closey's kind of got to that peak now, and I can get rid of him. And Jordan Clark, for Fremantle, obviously he's had his bye, but I do think he's definitely a mainstay for the rest of the season. So, looking at it right now, my captain this week against North Melbourne, likely Nick Dacos if he plays. My vice-captain, I've got it on Bontempelli, but that may change. Looking at it going forward, I'll have to wait and see. But this week, I'm sure I'm not the only one. This is a massive one for the buys. So many teams have the big buy this week. The Gold Coast, for one, I had 4 players before I'd done my trades. The Gold Coast, Essendon, Carlton, the West Coast Eagles, a couple of big mainstay teams that I've had to quickly trade out and quickly move around. Now, if everyone plays that played last week, I'll have 18 players. Now, if you don't know with your trades or the buys, 4 players, the 4 lowest scores in your team get taken out. So if you have 4 players not in it, then you don't get any. But yeah, so this week I should have 18 if everything goes to plan. Looking at it right now, I should be fine with 18. But it's going to be very close, let's be honest. And unfortunately for me, in the AFL Fantasy League, I have the guys on top. So Brad SCG is still sitting on top of our AFL Fantasy League, and I'm playing him this week. Now, he hasn't been in the greatest of form. He's 3 out of his last 5, so he's not in the greatest of form right now, but he's on top. And looking at it, I feel like this is going to be a pretty dull week for me. He does have a lot out himself, so I'm not calling it that's... I think already I'm looking at it right now, and I'm thinking this is game over for me. He has quite a few different players to me, so that's something that I have noticed. But yeah, I think he's set up for the buys pretty well. So if you are watching, Brad, you've done very well yourself. I think you'll flog me this week and kill my win streak. I've won at least 5. I think I've won 6 of the last 7. So, but I think my streak's going to end this week, guys. I'm just going to put it out there. I'm sorry for all the supporters of me who were thinking that maybe I would pull through and win another game, go undefeated for the rest of the season. But I'm already banking now that, look, I'm going to make the excuse. There's a lot of injuries, guys. I can't win this week. It's I've just got a lot of players out. We'll get them back next week. But right now, a little bit concerning there. But yeah, kind of moving forward though, I'm trying to set up my team now for the rest of the season. After the buys, I would love that the only play in my team that's a rookie or someone that, like, isn't a mainstay for the rest of the year, so to speak, would be, was hopefully going to be Darcy Wilson. But right now, I'm really unsure if that's going to be the case because he's in dour form. And, the funny thing was, I thought he was laid out against the Gold Coast. He did not have a touch, did not go anywhere near the football for the first quarter and a half of the Gold Coast game. Because basically the St Kilda just flooded the whole game. So he didn't have a chance on the wing. But he got the 34 in the end. So, yeah, it's pretty unfortunate for him. So hopefully he can bounce back this week against the Lions. Maybe they'll even rest him. Who knows? But St Kilda will have to bye next week. That's basically what I'm looking at for the AFL Fantasy. Hopefully trading out, I think, my 3 St Kilda players next week. That's probably what I'm looking at right now. And, yeah, hopefully I can build my team from that. But, yeah, a lot of players last week had a pretty poor performance. I was able to scrape over the line. But, yeah. And just quickly as well, my brother is currently sitting in 14th. Ooh, he's not doing very good. I don't think he's going to make it. That's pretty embarrassing. I'm not going to lie. The funny thing is, though, he's scoring better than me. He scored 2,058 last week, and I think he lost. So that's just unfortunate for him. Because he's actually on the overall leaderboard right now. He's better than me. I'm actually sitting in, 13th spot of best scorers, but I've just got the wins. You got to win. And that's what we're looking at here, guys. The head-to-head leaderboard at the end of the day. If you win the overall ladder in our AFL Fantasy Comp, I don't care. You got to win the head-to-head. You got to win against the mainstay. Like, you don't win for scoring the highest amount of points in the AFL season. You got to win on the final stage of the grand final. That's basically what we're saying. But yeah, guys, that's basically where we're going to end this episode of the Boundary Riders podcast. This is probably going to be a bit of a shorter one, but yeah, really not much. I'm just going to try and push this out. Not push this out, but yeah, it's 9 o'clock basically going into on a Wednesday. I want to get this out Thursday morning for you guys. But yeah, going forward, I'm going to potentially put these out. We'll potentially get these podcasts out on probably Wednesday, but if my brother can do a podcast on the Wednesday afternoon or Tuesday afternoon, he usually gets his schedule later in the week. So if we can get it, if he can join us on a Wednesday or whatever, then I'll push the podcast back a day. I feel like the podcast is a lot better when there's someone else to talk to, rather than me just acting like a crazy person sitting in front of a webcam. But yeah, I thought that'd be better. With the other, I really appreciate the support on the video essay that we've done. I know it's on another team, so they're not really as big as the topics about the AFL stuff. Like the commentary one went off pretty big for me, like 11,000 on the channel, so that's really good. And this one's got about 2,000 now, so that's a couple of days after it's uploaded. So I do really appreciate the support. I did make one mistake in it. I forgot to say that North Melbourne played in a prelim in 2014, but I'm sorry, I got that wrong. That wasn't the point of the video. The point of the video was the fact that they have their rebuild they started in 2016 was they stuffed it up. That's what it meant. But people brought up the fact of me making a mistake. But yeah, guys, it's basically going to end it there. If you did watch this on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. And of course, if you did listen to this on Spotify, make sure to leave us 5 stars and follow as well. But guys, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and we'll catch you all next week.